Hey there, this is Johnny Vasquez, founder of Knitiversity and New Stitch a Day. And today we are talking about sweaters. The reason why we're talking about sweaters is because we're going to be doing a sweater knitting boot camp in October. And so I wanted to take a deep dive on the topic as we get ready to launch this sort of like epic knit along where my hope is that you will be able to knit a sweater that you actually want to wear. But we'll get into that more as it gets closer. But this is a live training, so it's not, I don't have it scripted out or anything like that. So please bear with me as I work through this, through my notes here. But in this class, we're going to talk about the 6 essential sweater knitting styles. And these are basically sweater construction methods. And each one of them has its pros and cons, its unique design features, and most of them have a particular body type that they look best on. So I'm going to do my best to cover all of those bases and dive into why you might want to knit one style over another style, and also just give you an overview of what the sweater style is. Okay, but before we do that, I want to let you know that I've got a great resource for you. It is, hold on, I need to get this started. We are giving away this sweater planning guide, and it's a free download. It includes all kinds of really great information, stuff that people ask us all of the time when it comes to knitting a sweater, like what's the best yarn to use for a sweater? How much yarn do I need to buy when it comes to knitting a sweater? What measurements do I need to take? How do I properly measure my gauge for the sweater? And we even have a calendar in there that you can kind of plan out your sweater knitting schedule. So if you want to get the guide, just go to knitiversity.com/SPG, like sweater planning guide. Okay, and you'll be able to download that for free. Just enter your email on that page, and you'll be sent to it right away, and we'll also send you an email with the download link for that too. So without further ado, let's dive into our first sweater. The first sweater we have is called the Dolman Sweater, and I'm going to be working through these from like the easiest to knit to the most complicated to knit. And I'm basing that off of just the construction of the sweater purely, not all of the other details and finishing stuff that you can do. So if you're going to add color work or cables or fancy button bands or a shawl collar, all of those things are going to make your sweater more complicated. This is just talking about the base construction methods and how complicated those are. So first up is the Dolman Sweater, and the Dolman Sweater uses this very basic shape that's like a T. So the main design elements for this are that usually it's going to be a T shape or a bat wing shape. There's not going to be any additional shaping. If you're doing the T shape, it's just basically rectangles. The bat wing is going to have a bigger opening where the sleeve meets the body of the sweater. And there's a reason why the bat wing is usually found used for this type of sweater. And that comes to one of the cons, which I'll get to in just a minute. So the defining characteristic is that the sleeves of the Dolman Sweater are knit with the body. And so this is the most simple kind of sweater that you can make. And that makes it really good. One of the pros for this is that there is very minimal seaming when it comes to making a sweater like this. You could potentially make it almost seamless, but you would still have to connect. At the very least, you have to do a little bit of seaming at some point. But the good news is that you can knit it all in one piece. So you could start at the bottom, work up, add on stitches for the sleeves. You would work over all the way across for the rest of the sleeves. And then you would bind off, come back down to match the body. Now you could also just knit two pieces that are then seamed together at the top of the sleeves. Usually you just leave the collar open, although you could do some shaping to make it rounder, but it's really nice for like a boat neck top. And then you would just seam along the bottoms of the sleeves and the sides of the bodies. So it's relatively simple. The other nice thing is that the front and the back pieces are usually going to be identical or close to identical. So you don't have to do a lot of crazy shaping. In fact, there's almost no shaping unless you're doing the bat wing. And then you would have some simple decreases or increases along the bottom of the sleeve. And you just have straight seams that you're trying to, seam together in this. Super simple construction, but it has some cons. The cons for this are that you have a lot of extra fabric underneath the arms. And that's because there's not anything keeping the sleeves close to the body. It's usually like a very loose, bulky fit. And so that's going to cause this, because there's no shaping, you have extra fabric and that usually collects underneath the arms. So you'll notice that that's another reason why the bat wings design element is sometimes used, because it takes that extra fabric and makes it into a design feature by lowering and widening the body of the sleeve and where it connects to the body. You minimize how much extra fabric is underneath your arm, and then it just gives kind of like an interesting look to sleeves. The disadvantage to doing a bat wing is that you have a lot more knitting to do in order to get that sleeve. It's not a particularly flattering look for a lot of body types. It's a lot better on someone that has a smaller frame or a more traditionally proportioned body. So if you have like very large bust or really broad shoulders, it's probably not going to be the best look for you, but your granddaughter or your younger daughter who still has that nice young body is going to look really nice in something, or could look nice in this. It's more like a hip, saggy boyfriend sweatery look to it. Okay, next we have the drop shoulder sweater, and this is a similar look to the Dolman sweater, but this is knit in multiple pieces. So the main characteristic of this is that you have the main body is square, or rectangular, okay? It doesn't have any shaping at the shoulder seam, and neither do the sleeves for where they connect to the body. So it's basically a T shape, but you are going to knit the sleeve separately and then add them to the body. You'll sometimes see this done. It has no shaping at the shoulder. You'll sometimes see this done in like Icelandic sweaters. I remember talking with a designer who that's mainly what she knit, and they basically knit the body as a tube, and then they will cut the sleeve opening in the body of the sweater and then they'll knit the sleeve onto the body, and then they'll cut, if they're doing a cardigan, they'll cut it in the middle as well. It's called steeking, and it's not nearly as scary as it sounds. It's actually a really cool technique, but it makes it very easy to knit because that center, the body can be made in one big tube. And so you don't have any shaping that you need to do. You don't have, you don't even have to seam it if you want. So some of the other pros for this is that it's got a very simple construction. As I said, the main body part can be just knit in 2 rectangles or can be knit in 1 tube. And then the sleeves, while you will probably do some shaping for the taper along the sleeve, you don't have to do any shaping at the shoulder in order to get it to lay down along the body. Now you are, the front and the back are also mostly the same on this one. And so the cons, again, it has a bulky fit. The drop shoulder is called the drop shoulder because usually the shoulder seam is going to be coming down here. It's going to fall down. And the reason why that happens is because since you have the sleeve is basically like a T shape, when it's attached to the body, you need the extra fabric to bring the shoulder dropping down in order for the sleeve to like actually come next to the body. That means, again, you're going to end up with some extra fabric underneath the shoulder. This is the classic boyfriend sweater look, is the drop shoulder sweater, because it's that, like, you know, you're putting on a man's sweater that's much bigger than you are, and so it doesn't fit. And the difference here is that you're making the sleeves at a length that will look nice, versus something that's like extra long and not really fitting you particularly well. If you like that extra, like the bigger, bulkier fit, the look to that, you know, this is a good option. A very simple kind of sweater to knit, and its simple construction allows you to do more with the body because you don't have to really think about, okay, how do I need to adapt my color work pattern in order to deal with the decreases of like a set-in sleeve. So that's a huge advantage to a sweater like this. Same thing if you're doing something like lace or cables. The pattern doesn't need to be interrupted in order to knit the sweater nicely. If, again, this is going to look better on someone that's got a little bit of a smaller frame or that more traditional proportioned hourglass figure, or if you have like a very a skinny long figure. The reason why this can look good on a person like that is basically as we sort of fill in the gaps. So if you can't see someone's figure, you're going to assume that they have a more traditional female proportioned figure underneath the baggy sweater. So it's kind of that, you know, because it's hidden, then, you know, you have to, you know, decide what's behind the curtain, I guess. So, right. Next up, we have, this is also knit in pieces, which that can be a pro or a con. A lot of people don't like seaming sweaters. The nice thing about this is if you do knit that body in one piece, you can knit it in one piece up until the shoulder, then you can knit it flat across. You can do your collar shaping on the front and then just attach it at the tops. So that's a con in some ways, because if you don't like doing the finishing work, it's not knit in one piece. However, being knit in pieces also means that you don't have to carry around the whole sweater as you're working on it. All right, next up we have the Raglan Sweater, and this is one of my favorite types of sweaters. This is one of the first kinds of sweaters that I actually finished, and I think that it's a really great first sweater for most knitters, and I'll share why as we go along. So the defining characteristic of the Raglan sweater is that it has this diagonal shoulder seam. And an interesting fact, I don't remember the person who this was designed for, but it was an Army officer. He was kind of higher up and he lost an arm. And so he wanted a garment that would look good on someone who didn't have an arm. And so the designer of the uniforms came up with this diagonal shoulder seam, which allowed the sleeve for which the arm was missing to just kind of lay flat against the body. And so it didn't really draw any attention to itself. You will see this most commonly in like a baseball jersey, where they'll have a separate sleeve in a different color. One thing that I really like about the Raglan sweater is that you can do kind of cool designs along the seam in the shoulder, and they become like a design element. So I did a sweater once where I had like a cable going along the middle. Now the sleeve actually is kind of like a diamond shape. So you have the body of the sleeve, and then the top of it is like a big point. And that connects at the collar at the top, and then it works along on both sides, the front and the back, to create the sleeve. So your sleeve is actually the whole part of the shoulder. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. So the reason why it's a good thing is that you can knit this seamlessly. So and you can also knit from the top down, which is one of the reasons why, these are two of the reasons why I think it's great for beginners, because it's a very easy sweater to start. You start from the top down, and you can try it on as you're knitting it to see if it's fitting properly, to see if it's growing at the right rate. And it makes it easier for you to catch mistakes as you're going along. But one of the cons for this is that it's really not very flattering if you're a woman with broad shoulders. So it's going to sort of accentuate those shoulders for people. It's a comfortable sweater to wear, but it's going to, and if also a woman that has a bust that's a lot bigger than your shoulders, it's going to be hard to adapt the front or back of basically to adapt the bust area of the sweater, unless you're doing a cardigan, to sort of make it look right. You're going to end up with some extra fabric underneath the arms. So it's not that it can't look good even if you do have a big bust, but because the sleeve also will grow at the same rate as you have to accommodate for your bust, you can end up with some extra fabric underneath the sleeves. The other issue with seamless sweaters in general, but also with the Raglan sweater, is it doesn't have a seam across the top of the shoulder to support the weight of the shoulder. The seam is coming across the side. So it's not that this can't support any weight, but if you're doing this top down and seamlessly, there's not a point of, from an engineering perspective, there's not anything for the weight to be distributed across. And so when you bind two pieces of fabric together, you do get this sort of like extra structural element that allows the sweater to hang nicely on the body. When it's done seamlessly, that weight is distributed everywhere and at the weakest points. And so you can kind of get some stretch to the sweater in ways that you wouldn't necessarily want. And over time, that will be a problem with the sweater. I knit like a big bulky Raglan sweater, and I kind of regret that I did it top down and seamlessly because the yarn was so heavy because it was made out of this bulky, thick yarn that it just ended up stretching like a lot and not quite evenly. So the front would sort of hang down a lot more than the back of the sweater. And that's just not a problem that you get quite as much when you're using a sweater that's been seamed in multiple places, particularly across the top of the shoulder. Okay, so let's see. Next up, we have the circular yoke sweater. Now, this is a favorite of all knitters, or most knitters, because it's the sweater that you see used in those classic like Scandinavian colorwork sweaters. So I'll talk more about that in a second, but this is almost always a seamless construction. It's almost always knit from the top down. You can knit it from the bottom up, but that's not usually how it's done. And the yoke is knit basically in one big loop that's increasing evenly all the way across, all the way down. So it's almost like you're knitting sort of like a little shawl or cape over your shoulder area. And that's what gives it that really nice curved look when you're doing your design elements. And as your increases are symmetrical, it's very easy to design for it because you can build in your elements as you go. So this is like really commonly used for color work, stranded color work in particular. Basically anything that's using this Fair Isle color work. Look, it doesn't have to be Fair Isle, but the stranded color work along the top is going to use the yoke sweater. And it's really easy to tell when a sweater is knit this way. You're not going to see any seams along the shoulder. You're not going to see them along the top either. It's just going to be one sort of even, seamless piece. So it's a very sleek, beautiful look to it, and it really lets the design elements shine. I would say that the most beautiful sweaters that you will see for the most part when it comes to knit sweaters are going to be these circular yoke sweaters. And it's knit from the top down. So again, you can try it on as you're knitting it and make sure that you're catching any mistakes as you go. Now, the big con to this is that it can be a little bit constricting at the shoulders if it's not knit big enough, and it doesn't have a lot of movement in the top because there's not space for that. You have to make sure that you sort of knit that space into it, and then the whole project is always on the needle at once. So even if you are just adding the sleeves on later, you're not going to, you're still knitting. Basically, the whole thing is always connected to itself. So the biggest parts of the sweater are going to be done first, and then you'll add the sleeves on later. It's a lot of twisting things around. It can be a little bit annoying and fiddly to work with the further along in the sweater that you get. But the result, I think, is very much worth it, and it's a beautiful looking sweater. If you love to knit color work, this is a great option for you. But you can also use other textures in there. And I think you'll see all kinds of great examples of those. Okay, before we move on to the last two sweaters, I want to tell you about something that we are working on. It's called Yarnist Magazine, and this is a brand new monthly magazine that we are prepping to launch in January of next year. It's going to be monthly. We're going to focus on really simple patterns, and the idea behind it is we want to take like the stitches that we've done at New Stitch a Day and show you how they can be used in projects. So it's not just a matter of like, oh, here's a cool stitch pattern, but you don't know what to do with it. We're going to give you some great projects to knit with. Those projects are going to focus on simple, classic, on-trend patterns that anybody would enjoy wearing. Unisex designs, so they'll be good on men or women. And a big request that we've had is that we include multiple kinds of yarn for the ideas of what to do when you're knitting the projects. So that's definitely something that we're going to do. When we have items that offer multiple sizes, we will offer a wide range of sizes so that they can fit all kinds of body types. And we're going to be multimedia as well. So it's not just going to be written interviews with designers and yarn store owners and fiber artists. We're going to do podcasts so that you can hear from them as well. And we'll include video tutorials that will help you through the projects throughout the magazine. So it's going to be print and digital, and it comes out in January. And as a way to celebrate the launch of Yarnist Magazine, we are doing a huge giveaway every month. So you can enter to win more than $1,000 that we're calling the Knit for Life package. It's going to include a Yarnist Magazine lifetime digital subscription. So you will get the e-subscription every month for as long as the magazine's around. We're going to be giving you a Leica wood interchangeable knitting needle set. So those are just absolutely gorgeous knitting needles. They're really nice to knit with, and they've got a great selection there. We're going to be giving away one of those. And you're going to get a lifetime membership to Knitiversity Plus, which is our classes platform. We have all of our knitting classes. We've got over 40 knitting classes on there. I'm going to be adding some new classes very soon. We just added a class called Knitting Without Fear, which teaches the 13 essential knitting skills every knitter needs to know to be fearless. So in order to enter, and it's open to everybody as long as it's legal in your state or your country, you can go to knitiversity.com/win to enter. And we're doing this every month. So even if you don't win this month, you'll have a chance to win the next month. Plus, once you enter, there's a way for you to get even more entries for letting other people know about the giveaway. So go to knitiversity.com/win in order to enter. And you can learn more about Yarnist Magazine at yarnfund.com. Okay, so let's jump back into our sweaters. The next up, we have the saddle shoulder sweater. And to be honest, this is probably my least favorite sweater. And that's just because, one, it's kind of an awkward shaped knit. It's not very flattering unless you're a guy for the most part, because it really accentuates your shoulders. It looks very nice, but it's kind of a style that's not really popular right now anyways. But I wanted to include this because it is a distinct look to a sweater, and there are some unique features to it. So the main design elements here is that there's a flat panel that runs along the shoulder here. So it connects at the collar, and it comes all the way to the top of the shoulder and continues along the rest of the sleeve. So it's a little bit like the Raglan. The main difference is that the seam, there is a seam that's running along the top of the shoulder on the front and the back. And this is not usually knit seamlessly or from the top down. And again, the sleeve connects at the collar, and you get this like you get that flat part at the top. So it gives a very like military style look to it. And that makes it like really great for men's sweaters. Sometimes you'll see them with like a different kind of fabric at the top here. And then you'll have like kind of like a ribbed sweater. So it very nicely accentuates like a man's broad shoulders, but that's usually not something that women want to accentuate so much. If you've got, you know, a son or grandson in the military, this would be kind of a cool looking style sweater for them. And it can be knit top down, but that's not usually that's not usually the case. Okay, the big con is that it's really not flattering for broad shoulders, as I mentioned, and it holds the weight of the sweater better than a raglan, but it's still not quite as nice. It's highly dependent upon if it's how it's seamed. So, but because the weight is not on the top of the shoulder, instead it's sort of like on the outside of the shoulders, it's not as ideal when it comes to the sweater weight. Again, that's really going to depend on the material of your yarn and the thickness of the yarn and how heavy the actual fabric is going to be at the end of the day. Usually this is going to be knit in like a wool or a cotton, not a cotton, like a very lightweight yarn. So it's not going to be that big a deal when it comes to the weight distribution. And finally, we have the king of all sweaters, the set-in sleeve sweater. This is the, you know, by far if not the most popular, the best looking sweater by far, like without any question. And there's quite a few reasons for that. So this has heavy shaping on the sleeve shoulders. And so I didn't do a good job of demonstrating here in the diagram, but the sleeve is going to be shaped in sort of like a curved, almost like I can't think of the word right now, what I'm trying to say, but it's going to hang down next to the body because this is going to be like a cap. So you create the cap of the sleeve and then you'll knit down. But you're also going to shape the fabric along the body so that it comes and wraps close to the body underneath your armpit and then meets the other side. So you get this scoop here. And because those are both scooped, they kind of fit together real nicely, and that gives you that great contoured custom fit look. This is pretty much always knit in pieces, although there are some versions of this that are knit seamlessly. The predominant way to knit this kind of sweater is to knit each section in its own piece and then add them together. So this by far will give you the best fit of any sweater and for pretty much every body type. And that's because it's really, I won't say it's easy to customize, but it's customizable to whatever your shape is. So as long as you have the skills to adjust what's going on in the sweater to adapt it to your body shape, you'll pretty easily be able to make a sweater that looks good on you no matter what. And that really comes from the ability to shape the fabric around your body and give it that nice close fit rather than that big bulky look to it. It's very portable because it's knit in pieces, so you're usually only working on one piece at a time, and so you're just doing the front of the sweater or one half of the front of the sweater. You're just doing the back of the sweater. It's a lot easier to work on than doing the whole sweater at one time. Now, one of the cons is that the shaping can be complicated. If you have never done the math to do sloping decreases for something like this, it can sometimes feel a little daunting. There is a version of the set-in sleeve sweater that is only like a taper. So you just get like a little indent at the bottom to give you to that wrap around the midsection of the body, and then it comes sort of like a straight line. But that's not going to give you the best fit compared to a traditional set-in sleeve. Either way, it's still going to give you more of a custom fit than any of the other ones, but that shaping can be daunting for some people. And there's almost certainly going to be a lot of seaming and finishing to this, and you're going to be seaming those curves. Not that the curvature makes it any harder to seam, but there is just a lot more going on when it comes to the finishing for a set-in sleeve sweater, particularly because it's almost always going to be seamed versus some of the other sweater styles where you can knit them in one piece instead of the little pieces. Okay, so those are the 6 types of sweaters. Before we get to the questions and answers, I wanted to just talk real quickly about knitting a sweater top down versus knitting the sweater bottom up, okay? And we talked about some of these different sweater types, which allow you to do both. But I just want to talk about some of the advantages and the disadvantages of each compared to the other. So we've already talked a little bit about the top down. The best thing about knitting top down is that usually it's knit in one piece and you can try it on as you go. And this is a big advantage because you can really check what's going on in the sweater as you're working the sweater all the way down. And it will just save you a ton of time if you're able to sort of catch problems before they happen and fix them as you're working. So if you can see that you're increasing too quickly or it's just not fitting quite properly, you can adjust it at the point where it's an issue versus finishing basically the entire sweater and then going, oh crap, now it doesn't quite work, and having to like go back and fix that. Now, when you're knitting bottom up, you're basically knitting blind. You're hoping that all of your math or that the pattern has worked out properly and that you're matching gauge very closely so that you get a sweater that looks the way that it's supposed to as written in the pattern. But you have to knit the whole sweater usually and put it together before you can actually see if the sweater is fitting properly. Now, the advantage to knitting bottom up is usually the bottom up sweater styles are knit in pieces. So they're easier to knit because you can just knit a small piece at a time. You feel a sense of accomplishment faster as you sort of get different pieces done. And they're generally going to be more customizable in the design elements versus the top-down sweaters, which can have design elements, but you can't adapt the shaping quite the same way. So you're going to get a more custom fit usually with the bottom-up sweater versus a top-down sweater. Now, you can get a nice custom fit with the top-down sweater. It's not impossible at all by any means. But you are going to get a more contoured, sleeker fit with the bottom-up style sweater, usually a set-in sleeve sweater, than any other style sweater. So that's really where that advantage shines more than anything else. But the fact that you have to kind of like knit a lot of the sweater before you actually try it on is a big reason why I have mostly done top-down sweaters myself. But I have to say that some of the sweater that I'm wearing right now, I didn't knit it. I bought it at the store, but it's a set-in sleeve sweater. It's probably was knit. Well, it was probably knit in one big piece of fabric and then cut, but generally, yeah, it's going to be knit from the bottom bottom up. Now, there is one other kind of sweater construction, which is side to side. And that first sweater that we talked about, the Dolman sweater, you can actually knit it starting with one sleeve, knit it all the way across. And that offers some really interesting design elements to it. Because you can get sort of like vertical looking stripes if you're knitting garter stitch. You can do other kinds of striping effects with like color and stuff like that in there more easily. And you can get horizontally traveling cables by knitting it from side to side. And that's something that's a lot harder to do in other types of sweaters. The Dolman has sort of like a really cool advantage to it when it comes to those things versus the other sweater types. So I just wanted to touch on that real briefly, but that's pretty much it for our lesson today, but I am going to open it up to questions. So hold on one second and let me get out of here. Okay, there we go. And yeah, so let's see what we've got in the question box. Okay, so Margaret says, can you knit the body of a set-in sleeve sweater from the top down and then add the sleeves? Well, yes. I mean, there are top-down set-in sleeve sweaters. There's a one we've got an article about it that I'll put on University that I need to transfer over. But technically, yes, you can do that. I've never knit that, but Corey says, how on earth can you try on as you go? Most circular needles won't fit around your shoulders. Well, true. You could get like a very long circular needle. You know, if you have an interchangeable knitting needle set, it's pretty easy to connect multiple needles, cords together. And that will give you plenty of room on the needles to actually try. What I usually do is when I reach a certain point in the sweater, I transfer it to a waist yarn, and then I try it on from there. And that's actually good to do because it lets the fabric sort of hang all the way that it should. Sometimes when it's on the needles, it still kind of bunches up. And so that's usually the way that I do it. Okay, let's see. Lynn says, which style of sweater would be best for a top-heavy person? So if you're like very big bust, almost definitely the set-in sleeve style is probably going to be the best option for you. Again, as I mentioned before, if you're doing something like the Raglan, it's easy to knit. If your bust circumference is bigger than your shoulders, you're going to end up with just really gigantic sleeves. And so it's not going to look quite as nice. The other way that I would get around that is I would do sort of like a cardigan that's not designed to come all the way in. So it's just supposed to like hang straight down. That's going to be really easy to knit. It'll look nice, and you don't have to worry about the puckering around your chest because your sweater is trying to hold close against the tension of your bust, which I have the same problem. I mean, my shirts, like I'm a big guy, and so my shirts, you know, pull often right here at the chest. So that's what I would say. Okay, Vince asks, is a vest simply a set-in sleeve design minus the sleeves? Well, I mean, it could be a set-in sleeve. It could be a drop shoulder. With the drop shoulder, it wouldn't be drop shoulder. You would just make basically a rectangle. that comes right here. Usually the drop shoulder, there's a little bit more ease in the body, and so that's why the shoulder comes and drops down. So it's creating sort of a natural cap. But if you wanted it to be more fitted, like you would see in a suit vest, then yeah, it's going to have sort of that shaping along the where you would normally connect the sleeves. So yes, technically, for that type of sweater vest, it's more like a satin sleeve sweater. That's a great observation. Okay, let's see. This is a nice tip from Alexandra. She says, if you're doing a piece of a sweater, it's good to slip the first stitch to make it easier to sew the pieces together. So what Alexandra's talking about is a selvage edge or a selvage stitch. We actually have a bunch of them on New Stitch a Day in the library, and you can basically, there's lots of different methods of doing it, but essentially by slipping the stitch, you're creating an elongated stitch. And I do it on the first and the last stitch of most of the things that I work on, because it just gives a nice edge looking to it, but it absolutely makes it easier to seam those together because you have a bigger stitch to work into, so that they're easier to see and they're easier to work through. Let's see. Takora says if you're not a new knitter, you can put bust darts in the front of your sweater to accommodate the extra room needed for a bigger bust. Yeah, you can absolutely adapt the sweater fabric to what you need. That's easier to do if it's just a straight stockinette fabric versus something that's got a lot more design into it. And then you've got to think a lot more about, okay, how do I maintain design while I am contouring the front of the sweater? So that's one reason why I didn't mention that, because that's a really advanced technique for most knitters. But if you have the skills, absolutely, adapt away. Let's see. Corey says, is the continuous sleeve, set-in sleeve method a good alternative to the traditional set-in sleeve? I've never knit it, but that's the method that I was thinking of when it comes to knitting it top down and seamless. You can knit it that way. So I don't have any personal experience with that method myself. But I do want to investigate it more and see like what its advantages and disadvantages. I didn't mention it specifically here because it's an adaptation of the set-in sleeve construction method. And so I really was trying to just highlight the basic forms of the different kinds of sweaters. Okay, Margaret asks, is there any easy way to convert a raglan sleeve sweater to a set-in sleeve sweater? No, they're completely different constructions. So the only thing that you could do is you can knit the sleeves separately in a raglan sweater and seam them together. But to change it to a set-in sleeve sweater, like you'd basically have to, I'm not saying like be a designer, but all of this is based upon understanding the underlying frameworks or shapes that are needed in order to make that kind of sweater. So if you know what that blueprint needs in order to be knit, you could look at the design elements in one sweater and sort of transfer them over to another sweater style. But for the average person to basically take that sweater and then turn it into something else would be kind of challenging, I would say. Joan says, can you tell us more about the upcoming sweater class, the registration, the cost? We'll get into all of those details when we get closer to that time. We're still sort of like working out some of those things. The best way to get on the list to get notified about that is to download the sweater planning guide at knitiversity.com/SPG, which reminds me, we will put that up on the screen so people know. Velvety says, I have a book for fisherman sweaters that has patterns for the cables, but not the sweaters. Can I use a basic sweater to make a cabled fisherman sweater? I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm understanding what you're saying. Does the book itself not have sweater patterns, or is it just the cable patterns, or does it not give you a written pattern including the cables? If that's the case, then, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely possible, but the book might just be relying on your knowledge as a knitter to be able to plug in the cable patterns into the form. So you have to think about sweaters. Basically, all knitting is just like big rectangles or cylinders, and then you might do some shaping to change the way of that cylinder or the rectangle and turn it into like a diagonal, a diamond, or something like that. So what goes onto that flat piece of fabric, you know, can be whatever you want. You just have to understand like how to integrate those patterns in there, and to try and explain that right now would be like a little bit, well, it'd be too hard to do in this format. But is it possible? Yes, absolutely. Let's see. Kathy, you can email me and I will answer that question later. Susan says, what kind of sweater would be good for a first sweater project? Well, I'm partial to the top-down Raglan sweater. Even if it's not the best, like the best fitting for every body type, it looks good on most people. And if it's something that you just want to practice and have some success, it's a good way to learn sweater knitting. But you don't have to do all of the extra seaming, which can be a deterrent for some people. And again, you can try it on as you're going. So that's what we focus on in our sweater knitting boot camp. So that's what I recommended for sure. Okay, Velvet says that it's just cables, not sweaters. Basically, yeah. So you can take any stitch pattern and place it onto that framework, which is what we do in our sweater design course. We show you sort of like what the basic like forms are, and we talk a little bit about how do you integrate a pattern into that. So I haven't done a lot of sweater knitting like that, and there are different ways. There are very different ways to go about doing that, but essentially, you know, you're taking the big difference between knitting versus sewing is that in sewing, you take a big piece of fabric and you cut it to the shape that you want. When you're knitting, you knit the fabric to the shape that you want. That can make it a challenge sometimes when you're using a stitch pattern, because it's not easy for the brain to figure out like, okay, well, how do I continue this pattern going when I'm like cutting it off at certain points? But the reality is you just have to visualize those patterns as going straight up and down. And so as you're removing stitches from the fabric, they're just ending. It's not that you're stopping knitting those things, which is why it helps to have a chart usually when you're doing stuff like that. Margaret says, will there be a set-in sweater design in the upcoming class? I'm not sure I saw a class of this type of sweater on the university. We do have a version of the 30-day sweater blueprint for set-in sleeve designs. It has all of the written content, but we haven't developed any video content for that yet. So maybe, like, we do have a framework for it, and we have the custom fit calculators built for that. But as far as like a robust design class on that, there's still a little bit more work that needs to go into it before I would say that's ready for prime time, but technically it exists. Okay, well, that looks like all of the questions that we've got for right now, guys. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I hope that you had a great time and that you learned a lot of great stuff. Don't forget to go to knitdiversity.com/SPG to get your free sweater planning guide. There's a ton of really great information in there that I think you'll find super useful. And if you're interested in the sweater knitting bootcamp, it's going to be essential for that. So it's good to get sort of like a head start by going through the content in there. It's pretty robust and it's completely free. So just go to knitdiversity.com/sweater planning guide to get that. And you can also go to knitdiversity.com/win to enter to win the Knit for Life package, including the lifetime subscription to Yarnist magazine. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Next week, we will be talking about yarn for sweaters. So that is the topic for next week. We'll be doing this again Tuesday, 11 a.m. Pacific. And of course, we'll record these and put them up on to our YouTube channel. And we'll be posting blog posts based off of these classes onto knitdiversity.com. Make sure you get onto our email list so that you get notified when those go live. Have a great day and keep knitting fearlessly.